I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of Valley Water Collaborative. And before we switch to the slides, I want to introduce our group because once the slides are up, you can't see us. So I want to make sure you all know that we're real people and we're not an AI developed, whatever they're called, but we're real people working on this project. So I'm going to go around the room, start with the Valley Water staff, and then we'll go to our two consulting groups that are going to be you're going to be hearing from today. So let's start out with Maureen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen Thompson, Program Manager for the Valley Water Collaborative.
And Eva.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eva Dwyer with Valley Water Collaborative, and I'll be taking attendance today. So if you wouldn't mind writing your name in the chat as well as the organization you're with and which basin, just so I can keep notes of that.
Yeah, and if you don't have the function to do that in chat, just send us an email after the meeting. Obviously, we have most, if not all, of your email addresses, but we want to make sure that we capture everyone that participated today, so we can keep you on the list for future meetings. And then
yes.
Ezra, go ahead and introduce yourself. Ezra, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Hello, yes, my name is Ezra Clausen. I'm with Valley Water Collaborative.
And Ezra works on some of the outreach for the program. All right, well, yes. To our consulting firms, Richard.
Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Meyerhoff of GEI Consultants and part of the team that's helping develop the documents for the Priority 2 subbasins.
Thanks, Richard. And Jackie?
Hi, I'm Jackie Takeda. I'm also with GEI Consultants, and I work with Richard also on getting the regulatory documents in place.
Vicki.
Hey everyone, I'm Vicki Kresinger-Graybert, and I'm part of the technical team. I'm with Woodruff and Scamanini Consulting Engineers, and we're helping to develop the documents. And Barb.
And I don't see her name, but I believe she's on. Barb.
Yep. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Barb Dalgish. I also work at Woodruff and Scamanini Consulting Engineers with Vicki, and I'm part of the technical team with Jackie and Richard working on the submittal documents.
Okay, good. Anybody else that needs to be introduced? We have more than 30 on this call, so I think we're going to skip the individual introductions as we go through the meeting, but please don't hesitate to raise your hand, shout out or whatever. If you can't find your hand raising, ask questions both for clarification and otherwise, because we've got 2 hours for this presentation, but we don't have 2 hours worth of slides. So our main goal is for you to have a pretty good or very thorough understanding of what's coming up with preliminary management zone proposal and other activities. And I see this in the chat. Yes, the presentation was mailed out in the packet. If you did not receive that, drop a note in the chat and we will send you that. My apologies for the voluminous pre-meeting package. There was a lot of information in there, but this is a pretty comprehensive program, and I figured it would be a good resource for all of you. After this meeting, to look over some of the slides, and as I said in the cover email, if you didn't get that, please email us questions as well. This is the time to understand and learn about the program and figure out what your roles and needs are as being part of Valley Water Collaborative. All right, I'm going to tee up, or Maureen can tee up the slides, please. Okay, good. Now, if you can go presentation, there you go. Okay, we'll skip the first couple of slides. We did do these are the introductions, again, of the names, and again, they're on the presentation that was emailed to you or will be. To the next slide. And so what we're going to do after I give you a little bit of overview on Valley Water is we'll hear from Richard on the preliminary management zone proposal and the development process. And then something you will all be interested in, I'm sure, for your various regions except Yolo, is that we will have, we had our consultant do some preliminary look at the nitrate level. So we got some really interesting maps on the nitrate characterization for these areas. And also, equally important, is the preliminary domestic well assessment, which gives us some well counts. And I'm going to jump back and forth on this here. We all will through our presentation. In the priority 2, priority 1 basins, this well count was an indicator of what our potential well testing that we're going to do, and also the possible bottled water deliveries that are going to occur throughout the next few years. And I'll come back to that later, but it's a good first shot at what's in our area based on available public information. So Barb will be covering that information. Then also talking about the early action plan and the content and the process to get that rolling. And then some of the key dates for you all in participating in with Valley Water in the Pathway B. We're also going to talk about Pathway A alternative. My understanding is there may be some on this call that are still considering that, and that's, of course, that's everyone's option to look at Pathway A or even participate in that. But Richard and others have some pretty good detail to give you an idea of what you could be up against in going for the Pathway A. And then finally, the preliminary management zone proposal and early action plan, as well as the key dates that will be occurring between now and December 28th when this report is due. And then also our contacts and questions. Okay, next slide. And this is going to be a high-level description of Valley Water. Next slide. As many of you are aware of our organization, we are a nonprofit. We were formed to implement the management zone approach for the Modesto and Turlock basins. We have an administrative office in Modesto, and you can see our mission here is twofold. We want to implement a program that provides the safe water for residences. That's on the deliverable side for our organization, but on the permittee side, we need to develop an evidence base to show that we over time are protecting and enhancing the quality of groundwater used for drinking water in our regions. So those of you who haven't heard about CV Salts too much detail, we were able to negotiate a basin plan amendment for the Central Valley Regional Board that allowed us to get an extension on meeting the 10 milligram per liter drinking water standard at our discharges in exchange for doing this free well testing and providing bottled water. And so we also integral to that is us showing as permittees, dischargers, if you will, that we are going to improve our activities so that we minimize or even eliminate where possible any discharges of nitrate into groundwater. So the next slide. Our board of directors, which was established not long after we were formed in 2020, is made up of 3 represented from irrigated agriculture, 3 from the food processor winery industry, 2 from the dairy industry, 1 from poultry, and 3 cities. We have, as you all know, advisory committees in each of our priority 2 basins. We have opened the conversations for folks in those priority 2 basins to become part of the board of directors, either through replacing existing board members or even possibly adding more board members. So far, we have not had any requests to add board members or either way, because there's quite a responsibility to being a board member. I see Paul Huckabee from Bronco Winery is one of our board members on the call, and he will attest that we have many important decisions and a fair amount of work to be on the board of directors to guide this organization. So we can come back to that in future meetings, but today we'll just talk about what's upcoming in this preliminary management zone proposal. So the next slide. So this is a map encompassing both our priority 1 Modesto Turlock basins and the additional basins that have committed to joining. And we have 1 Yolo County or Yolo basin that is I can't say it's fully committed, but they're having a meeting tomorrow where they're going to decide if they're going to participate as a priority 2 basin. And the other 4 basins that have committed, Delta Mendota, which is in the Stockton area, East San Joaquin Delta Mendota is the West Side Coalition area, or the west side of the valley from roughly Wesley down to Los Angeles. East San Joaquin is the Stockton area, and Merced is self-explanatory, and Madera also as well, self-explanatory, and where that region is. And one of the things that one of our tenets for this organization is we're trying to implement this program as economically as we can. Cost pressures in all aspects of our businesses and all that we do here in the Central Valley, it's extreme pressure right now with inflation and other things. And as of now, we feel like the board does, and we're getting a good response. And we think this is the best way to launch this requirement fulfillment in this region. And if sometime in the future a basin decides we're going to be better, more cost effective going on our own, that's certainly going to be an option. But for now, for organizing, report writing with our consultants and developing not only the network of labs to test wells, but also the water providers, we feel that the economies of scale can benefit all of our budgets. So we do this as economically as we possibly can. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it over to Richard to give an overview of the preliminary management zone proposal development. And excuse my dog. And I'll turn it over to you, Richard. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Perry. And go ahead to the next slide, Maureen. All right. For this next section, we're going to give a kind of a range of information from pretty high level to a little bit more detailed. And some of this you may have heard before, but we know we have different folks on who have different levels of understanding. So we want to kind of frame this up as best as we can. What I want to do right now is talk a little bit about the nitrate control program and then where the regulatory deliverables fit into the process and what this process looks like over a period of time. So as Perry already mentioned, the 2020 was really the kickoff. That's when BWC was formed, and the reason for that was the nitrate control program became effective back in January of 2020. If you are familiar with the regulation, it divided the Central Valley groundwater subbasins into priority 1, priority 2, or was generally referred to as unprioritized areas for implementation of the program. Priority 1 included 6 groundwater subbasins, the Modesto and Turlock, which was on the screen a moment ago on the map. And then around that area, Chowchilla, the Kings, Cahuilla, and Tule subbasins. Their notice to comply was several years ago, and they have gone through the full process of developing a series of regulatory deliverables that took over a period of about 3 years to develop, submit to the board, get comment, go through public processes and the like. So it's a relatively long process to get the management zone established and then to develop the documents that are necessary under the control program. The program is focusing on 3 goals that are giving the paraphrased version in the first 3 sub-bullets at the top. First and foremost is to ensure safe drinking water for residents impacted by high levels of nitrate in their drinking water. It focuses on local communities with domestic wells and alike, which may have challenges with having safe water. So that's the first part. Second is over the long term, reduce nitrate impacts to water supplies. This is through ensuring that the amount of nitrate that gets to groundwater is greatly reduced such that there's no longer a facility causing or contributing to a violation or an exceedance of a water quality objective, the nitrate objective in groundwater. And then there's this long-term goal to restore groundwater quality where reasonable and feasible. Those last 2 words being very important because in some areas it just might not be possible. When we say restore, what we're talking about is really improving water quality such that the implementation of reductions of nitrate impacts over the long term allows groundwater quality to actually improve and get better. As I said, the plans have been done and prepared and submitted to the board for the priority 1 areas. The last key deliverable was September 5th of last year. If you're interested in any of these plans, they are available, and we'll have some links up after a while on this presentation. It's always probably not a bad idea to kind of look ahead and see what's coming. The documents do get more significant. The last one submittal is the management zone implementation plan. It is a substantial document and has a lot of kind of lays out a path forward to meet these above goals. So now, obviously, we're focused on priority 2. The regional board had so much time before they had to shift from priority 1 to 2 per regulatory requirements. And there are 8 subbasins that are now tasked with implementing the program in their particular areas. I think you all know you received some mail back in December of 2023 indicating that you as a permittee had a duty to comply. So you received the typical notice. And now you're going through the process of making decisions as to how you best to comply. And we'll talk more about that as we go. Next slide. So as I noted, there are several deliverables, and we're at the very beginning. Even though the notice to comply upper left there was back in December of last year, we have a full year to submit what is the first key deliverable for a management zone, and that is to submit a preliminary management zone proposal, often referred to as the PMZP. It's due by December 28th of this year. Now, all dischargers that receive a notice to comply have to respond in some manner, and the final date for responding to the regional board as to how you intend to comply with the nitrate control program is actually not till February 26th of next year. If you decide to join the management zone and be part of the preliminary management zone proposal, you will have addressed that requirement. The management zone proposal itself is your notice of intent to the board that we as a discharger plan to join the management zone, and that's how we intend to comply. But you do have all the way to February 26th to make that decision. If you choose not to join the management zone before December 28th, or you decide to, in the long run, not join it at all, or do you want to be a path A, you want to join the path A where it's individual compliance, you will have to notify the board and provide the appropriate documentation by February 26th of next year. As part of the preliminary management zone proposal submittal, in December, we include what's called an early action plan. That is a regulatory requirement that is spelled out in detail as to what goes into that document. It is an appendix to the PMZP. So it is submitted in December. The regulation requires that within 60 days of submittal of your PMZP, you must begin implementation of the early action plan unless the regional board has some concerns with your plan. Based on experience in the priority 1 areas, they had some comments on the original early action plans in the priority 1 areas, but no one was told not to implement. So you can assume that early action plan implementation will begin on February 26th. After the PMZP is submitted, the regional board goes through its process of reviewing the document, comparing to the regulation, is it compliant and the like, and then they will notify the VWC at some point that now submit a final management zone proposal, and that will be due 180 days after the regional board provides that notification. So basically 6 months. Based on priority 1 experience, the regional board took about 6 months to provide that notice, and then 6 months to submit the final management zone proposal. So assuming they follow their same approach this time around, we assume the final management zone proposal will need to be delivered to the regional board on or about December 1 of 2025. So in about a year and a few months. But that's not the end of the process. The board takes that final management zone proposal. They have to, again, review to be compliant with the regulation, and they will provide a notice to the VWC about acceptance. And that is to decide whether or not they accept the establishment of the management zone. Up to this point, it's a proposal. And until they provide that letter of acceptance, it is not an established management zone. But with that acceptance will come a request for the final deliverable, excuse me, which is the management zone implementation plan. And you will have 6 months to submit that plan. Again, based on previous timelines, we would guess about a year after submittal of the final management zone plan that will be due. And yes, that's over 2 years off, but there's a lot of work to prepare that plan, I can assure you. While all this is going on, you're kind of walking through these different steps of deliverables. The early action plan, once it begins implementation in February of next year, it will continue throughout all the period of time that you're preparing additional regulatory deliverables and well into the future as you're implementing your management zone implementation plan. It is a very long-term implementation program, and you must continue to implement that plan until you have long-term solutions implemented within the management zone. And how you're going to do that and such is part of the implementation plan. Next slide. All right, so what is a management zone? There's a whole page in the regulation that defines it in detail. Kind of highlighted the key points, and it kind of relates into our deliverables. First and foremost, it's a defined area which incorporates a portion of a large groundwater basin or subbasin. Obviously, each of our subbasins that are priority 2, we are going to be submitting a proposal that each one become its own management zone in time, so we meet that requirement. The point of joining a management zone and deciding to be part of it is that it allows collective compliance. So permitted dischargers that opt to join the management zone work collectively and collaboratively to meet the goals of the nitrate control program. So those 3 goals we mentioned before about providing safe water, about reducing nitrate impacts, and restoration, you all work together to achieve those over a very long period of time. That's different from individual compliance where you would need to show the board how you're either doing it now or will do it in the future. The last sub-bullet there is that from a compliance standpoint and how the regional board will evaluate compliance, each compliance is evaluated within or assessed within a basin or subbasin. And that then requires us to keep in mind that these subbasins have boundaries that will have to be honored in the future when you're looking at compliance. So what does that mean from a deliverable standpoint is that we can work broadly at the beginning, and we talked about with the regional board, so they agree this is a reasonable approach, but we have to get more fine-tuned as we go down the road. So your PMZP, the upper right bullet, and early action plan, and final management proposal, all those deliverables, we will be submitting as one document for these all priority 2 areas. And so it'll be a very large document with specific subsections that tell about each of the priority 2 subbasins. And the regional board is fine with that type of submittal. But that also means that we are developing one early action plan to implement across the priority 2 areas collectively. That is allowable by the regional board, but when we get to the management zone implementation plan, a future deliverable, they have to be written specific to each subbasin. So eventually there will be an MZIP, which is the acronym for Merced. There'll be an MZIP for Madera, Eastern San Joaquin, and Delta Mendota, and YOLO also if they join the BWC. There's a lot of commonality in the MZIPs if you look at the ones that have been created in the past, this past year with the priority 1 areas, but they still have unique characteristics for each subbasin, and they have to be prepared separately. And that the purpose for that is because then it allows the regional board to evaluate compliance specific to each subbasin. Next slide.
Richard, I want to just bring your attention to one question in the chat. I think it's if we have chosen pathway B, do we need to submit the NOI by February 26, or does VWC submit on the city's behalf?
If you have joined, if your facility is included in the preliminary management zone proposal when we submit it, that is your NOI. You have done what you need to do to submit your NOI. The regional board will look at the list of permittees that are participating, and you basically checked off, I am participating in the management zone. No further documentation is necessary. If you wait beyond, so that you're after that December submittal, and you're coming up on January, February of 2025, and you have not been included in the proposal, we'll talk, there's actually a slide devoted to that later, but you will then need to submit a notice of intent that you telling the board, yes, we are going to join the management zone. You'll just be doing it at a later date. Perry.
Yeah, let me explain the internal workings of a late submittal or a late joining to Valley Water, late being after the submittal. We had this occur in our Modesto Turlock basins when we began, and one particular sector had 4 entities that said, we're in, we want to make sure our industry sector is covered, and those 4 covered their percentage of that first year budget. The following year, 10 other entities from that sector joined. So those 10 then had to cover, if you will, back dues of that initial year, so that those 4 entities that initially paid didn't even have to pay for a year. I think it was even 2 years because they carried the whole budget sector in their payments. So delaying doesn't help the bottom line for Valley Water or for that entity, because we're running an organization that is supported by all the members, and so it's only equitable that late joiners have to pay back dues. Now, the only entity that was given a buy on that was a small municipality. It was actually a wastewater treatment facility for about 50 homes. Applied for pathway A, and it took 2 years before the regional board even told them no, or they gave them such a high requirement that they essentially spent a considerable amount of money just to apply for pathway A that was eventually turned down. So the board, that's the only exception that the Valley Water Board has given to someone that joined late.
Okay, Marie, next slide, please. Okay, so again, pulling back to where we are today, we're beginning work and already have begun work on the preliminary management zone proposal. Again, this is a document that'll be due in December. There are, again, a whole suite of requirements per the regulation. These are the 6 key ones. If you narrow it down, first of all, define your boundary. Should be no surprise there. What is your area you're planning to be a management zone for? Who is participating? So what we're just talking about here, who has decided they want to submit as Path B and be part of the management zone. So we provide that information. There will be an initial assessment of nitrate water quality conditions in groundwater. Barb's going to talk about the preliminary assessment of that right now. That information ultimately goes into the PMZP. Similarly, we have to assess what public water supplies or domestic wells might be being affected by nitrate in groundwater that's currently exceeding water quality objectives. So additional analysis is done of these types of systems. And again, Barb will talk a little bit about that also in a moment of where we are with that. For every participating discharger, we are required to provide a summary of the existing nitrate management practices based on their current discharge permits. Now, if you are under a general orders, for example, the irrigated lands program or the dairy program, all we do is summarize what your general order currently requires. If you are an individual discharger, obviously you have your own permit, then we pull that information relevant only to nitrate. We don't worry about other elements of your permit. And we summarize that in a tabular fashion in the document. And we'll talk more about that in a minute as what that might look like down the road. And very importantly, as we said, this early action plan is a key component of the preliminary management zone proposal, explaining to the board how we intend to implement that in each of the subbasins. Next slide. All right, with that I'm going to turn it over to Barb Dalgish to talk about where we are with various characterizations, and I'll come back and talk about additional information for permitted dischargers in a minute.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, so I'm going to focus on some of the analyses that help us identify areas where nitrate is elevated in groundwater and translate that into figuring out how many wells and residents might be impacted by nitrate. Maureen, could you advance the slide, please? Thanks. So in order to locate those areas where drinking water might be affected by nitrate, we did an initial assessment of groundwater conditions, as Richard just mentioned. This involved gathering and compiling publicly available groundwater quality nitrate concentration data and focusing on the upper portion of the groundwater aquifer called the upper zone. So the upper zone of groundwater is the portion of groundwater where most private domestic wells pump their drinking water from. So it's kind of the most importance in terms of this nitrate control program, because kind of those are the most vulnerable. You assume that, you know, the big cities that pump from really big, deep wells have some sort of system of dealing with nitrate already. So they're not really the target of this program as much as some of these private domestic wells that might be impacted by nitrate are. So the next step is using the data to locate areas with unsafe levels of nitrate in drinking water and identifying where private domestic wells are located within those areas with unsafe nitrate levels, and also identifying public water systems that have a way to deal with nitrate, such as treatment or blending. And so in the next series of slides, I'll be showing you the results of these analyses where we created heat maps of recent nitrate levels in groundwater. And we'll use these maps to estimate the number of domestic wells and the population of residents in areas with elevated nitrate. So I'll go through the 4 management zone subbasins one by one to show you the ambient nitrate levels in that upper zone of groundwater, and then show you the locations of known domestic wells and public water system boundaries. I'll also share some well counts and population numbers for each subbasin. And I think Harry mentioned this at the very beginning, but as soon as the Yolo subbasin officially becomes part of the Valley Water Collaborative, we can hold a separate briefing for those dischargers and permittees to show you this information too. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so we'll start with the Delta Mendota subbasin. You could advance to the next slide, please. So here is the map of ambient groundwater quality for nitrate in the upper zone. And this is only looking at recent conditions. So since 2010 to 2024, that was kind of the data period that we were looking at to get a sense of what the most recent view of the subsurface conditions are. So the red concentrations are, or the red areas on the map on the right, are areas where nitrate was measured above the safe drinking water limit, or the MCL, the maximum contaminant level of 10 milligrams per liter as nitrogen. We are most concerned with areas that are orange and red, and I'll explain why. So orange, the orange shaded areas on the map on the right indicate levels where nitrate concentrations are above 7.5, which is like 3/4 of the way towards that MCL, that safe drinking water limit. And so we're most interested in that range between 7.5 and above, because that is where nitrate is considered to be elevated. And so those people that are relying on water coming from that area might be at risk. So the map on the right is just showing the control points. Those are like the wells that we had data for. Those are the white dots. And then the shaded red and green and orange and yellow colors indicate the levels of nitrate. Go ahead, Perry.
Yeah, I might add that a requirement of the nitrate control program is that when we test a domestic well that lands between 7.5 and 10, we are required to go back in a year to retest that well. We are in, I think, going on year 3 of doing that, and I keep getting asked about the trends of the groundwater quality, and there's no real trend other than some are up and some are down. So it's interesting to see what happens when we go back and retest. But just to let you know that it's a retest until it's, I don't know, we haven't got to the until part of the question yet. Until it's below 7.5, I guess, or above.
Right, either, or if it goes the other way and it goes above 10, then
yeah,
you're done testing and they provide bottled water. Okay, so if there are any questions about the process of how we got these maps, you can ask now, because I'll repeat this kind of slide for each of the other 3 management zone subbasins. Okay, Maureen, you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so using that information, we can translate that using mapping techniques to look at the locations of public water system boundaries and the locations of known domestic wells. So the map on the left side, it's not really, I mean, you can't really read anything on there, but just know that the black dots are locations of domestic wells. The red to green is the same shading ambient nitrate conditions that you saw on the previous slide. So red and orange are the ones of concern. And then the blue kind of shaded areas are existing public water system boundaries. So you assume that a lot of the public water systems are in compliance, right? They are required to be because the state regulates them and says you have to, comply with safe drinking water standards in order to serve the water to their people. So even though there might be domestic wells located within those public water system boundaries, they're not our main focus. Okay, so when we look to this table on the right-hand side, there's a lot of information, but I really want you to focus on the circled areas of orange and red. So those are, again, the orange indicates anything above 7.5 to 10, which 10 is the MCL. And then the red is anything where the nitrate levels are above the MCL or unsafe to drink, right? So if you follow the columns, we have counts of domestic wells located outside public water system boundaries. Again, like I said, the public water system boundary, you assume that if an individual lives within a public water system boundary, they have access to safe drinking water, or they should have safe drinking water if they are tied into that public water system. However, we do count the number of wells outside of the public water system boundary just so that we're covering everybody, possibly, because it is possible that some individuals that live within the boundary choose not to partake in the public water system water, but instead rely on their domestic well, their private drinking water well, for their own personal drinking water use. So we still need to understand what those numbers are. So if you go to the two rightmost columns, those are kind of the key numbers. So for Delta Mendota, we have about 480 domestic wells. So that's the 154 plus the 327 that's circled in the orange and the red on the right side. So about 480 domestic wells with elevated nitrate. And translating that into population using the 2023 census data, that translates to about 6,700 people living in areas with elevated nitrate. I'll also note here that this gray line in the table is sort of the blank areas where we don't have any control points. So we don't really know what the ambient nitrate conditions are. So it's possible that some of those 293 wells that are in that gray unknown area may also be at risk. So that's why, the outreach and the early action plan is really important to try and ask all these people, hey, can we test your well? Can we find out what the nitrate levels are so that we can kind of fill in the gaps of our maps? So if there's any questions about this process, let me know, because I'm going to move on to the next subbasin.
Yeah, Barb, let me add a little bit to this too. So when we go into our planning mode for each of these basins, that 154 plus 327, we consider our universe. That's the likely possible number of people that might apply for this program. I mean, we're going to do our best to find a mailing list, develop mailing lists based on that map on the left, and we'll advertise and promote it to that area through postcards and other means. But when you look at the Modesto Turlock Basin, our total was about 5,000 wells in our first year, or let me say it a different way, in 3 years of activity, we've got 1,000 applications out of that 5,000 roughly universe. Whether or not that math translates into what happens in this basin or the other basin, of course, is unknown, but it gives you an idea that of kind of your universe. Also, some rules of thumb that the other management zones have found, as well as us, is that it's hard to get people to apply for this program. And we've yet to see any management zone where that universe has 100% application. So over the 3 years that we've been around, we've gotten up to 1,000, and we're giving bottled water to about 500 people. So 500 out of 5,000 is roughly the amount of people that are getting bottled water in Modesto Turlock basins. So just to give you kind of that's more specific than you need to know at this moment, but just give you an idea when you see these numbers, that's what we use to kind of estimate what our anticipated expenses are in two of the categories of our budgets.
Thanks, Perry. Could you go to the next slide? Okay, so next I'll talk about the Eastern San Joaquin. Next slide, please. So same thing, we have the control points as the white dots. So that meant that we actually had measured concentration data between 2010 and present. And we could use that data to create that mapping of the ambient nitrate conditions in, again, the upper zone, which is the upper portion of the aquifer where most domestic wells are completed. So here you can see kind of from Manteca south, the Ripon and Escalon, those are kind of the hotspot areas, as well as a few places around Lodi in the north. Next slide, please. So translating that into domestic well counts and population in the areas that are elevated, again, just focus on that orange and red line that's circled, and moving to the right-hand side, you can see about 400 domestic wells in the orange or in the 7.5 to 10 nitrate, and then 866 above the MCL. So that's about 1,300 domestic wells, and then translating that into a population, it's about 28,000 people in that orange and red area. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on to Merced. Next slide. So Merced, again, you can see kind of where we have some data gaps on the east side and on the west side, central. But we do have pretty good coverage through Atwater and Merced down to La Grande. So next slide, please. Okay, so now you can see the coverage of the black dots, which are again the domestic wells, and the blue shaded areas, which represent the public water system boundaries. And looking at the table, we can count up the number of domestic wells in each shaded area and the population. And so for Merced, we have about 550 domestic wells in elevated nitrate areas, and that translates to about 20,000 people. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have Madera. Next slide. So Madera is kind of different because you don't see a lot of red in this map. We really only have a few isolated hotspots with, that means like maybe only 1 or 2 wells that had high nitrate. Next slide, please. And you can see how that translates into the number of domestic wells in the population. So before, when we were talking about, over 500 or thousands of domestic wells and people, now for Madera, as a contrast, we have only 86 domestic wells in the orange and red areas and about 3,500 people. So that's I think all I have for these slides. And again, YOLO, our friends from YOLO will do this for you guys at a later date when you guys join BWC. I'll pass it back to Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Barb. And so the work that Barb is sharing is labeled it preliminary because this is an ongoing process, but as participants in the management down the road, you'll have a chance to see that information be finalized as we work towards submittal of a management zone document. So you'll see that stuff again. I'm going to shift gears here and talk a little bit about early action plan, just provide a little bit more meat on what's entailed, what's required in that plan, just to bring you fully up to date of what to expect. So next slide. So for today, the simplest thing to do is to show you a table of contents that's on the right there of the Turlock Management Zone Early Action Plan. And this is what was originally submitted back in 2021, I believe, when they had to submit their first early action plan. It's been tweaked in the development of the final management zone proposal. As these were the first time it was done, so learned things, and so it was adjusted. And then when the management zone implementation plan was submitted last year, there was an additional tweaking as needed to bring the program up to date as it's being implemented. But fundamentally, this is the basic structure. And because we're submitting one preliminary management zone proposal for all subbasins together, and we're hopefully going to have one early action plan within there for everyone to implement simultaneously within your subbasins, what we'll do is when we create this document, we will make it generic for everyone, but where it's necessary to have sub-basin specific information, we will have appendices in there that provide that information. For example, section 3 on the right, identification of potentially impacted groundwater users. Barb is just showing the kinds of information that is used to help generate that information. There would be a general overview about the subject, but then the specifics for each of the subbasins would be in an appendix for the early action plan. We intend to build off what we know. The early action plans have been very successful. The board actually didn't approve them 100% right out the gate. They did tell us to go ahead and implement and provided some comment early on. So there have been some adjustments over time to fully meet what the regional board wants in an early action plan. And we will take that as what is accepted today and use that as our basis for what we will propose for the priority 2 areas. And of course, you'll have opportunities to look at that not too far down the road. We'll show you some dates here shortly. So if you've looked at an old early action plan before, expect what comes out soon here as a draft for these priority 2 areas to look very similar. We don't want to reinvent the wheel of something that's working. One thing we will need to do is down at the bottom here on the left, there have been a couple things the board has asked to be incorporated along the way, and we'll make sure those are in yours. So you wouldn't see them in the original TURLOC, but they will be in your early action plan. And these are a couple specific things. One is how we addressed and analyzed the data, some background, so we call it data transparency. That came up along the way through public comment that was necessary to show early on. And lastly, there's a reporting mechanism now that is regularly used on a monthly basis that didn't exist in the original P1s. It exists today. So obviously we would build upon something that's already working and meets the board's expectations. Next slide. As part of early action plan development, we do have to do community outreach. And so while we're talking to you today, this is outreach, but we're focused on permittee outreach, those who are actually supporting the program and making it so. You're the ones that need to comply. We also have to do community outreach directly to targeted residents, local residents, those folks that might be impacted by elevated nitrate within their subbasins. And so we have 3 rounds of community outreach meetings that will be happening, and they start tomorrow, where we build a foundation. We start by trying to reach the local community to talk about what is the nitrate control program, what is an early action plan, what's coming down the road, things to be aware of. That we have a virtual meeting, one tomorrow afternoon, and then we'll give the same presentation in an evening time on Thursday, the 15th. Then we have a second round. This is planned to be a hybrid, so it'll be in person and virtual at the same time, planning that for the latter part of September. Then we come back to these same folks, and hopefully we're building more interest in the local community and get more participation and tell them about here's what we would plan right now or considering putting in an early action plan. And so they have an opportunity to react to that. Now, obviously, we're going to build on what we've done before and what's working in the priority 1 areas. So we will bring that to them. There's always the possibility of community residents in some area want to see something different or some tweaks and such, but we will certainly need to listen to that if it happens. I'd be surprised if it happens, simply because we have a very good success story and a lot of testimonies that can be brought to bear to show how it's working well in the priority 1 area. So we, again, kind of assuming the early action plans will look very similar in the P2s, but we do have to give the community the opportunity to weigh in. Third round will be planned for latter part of October, and that is to kind of show them, okay, here's what a draft early action plan looks like. We've now drafted it for them to look at. You will have seen it prior to that. And more importantly, this fits into the overall PMZP, make sure they understand the bigger picture of the program and context and how they can participate going forward. On these community meetings, just one last note here, anyone's allowed to come if you're interested. Those of you who are on this call today want to participate, just let Maureen know if you're not aware of how to do that, and you're more than welcome to join that presentation. It goes back to the fundamentals of what's nitrate and why should you be concerned about it. So, next slide.
Richard, anyone that's interested, just drop us an email and we'll send you the link. We have a meeting tomorrow afternoon and Thursday evening. So we have 2 options you can attend. It will also be taped. So just drop us a note and we'll send you the Zoom address.
Okay.
Thanks.
And next slide, Maureen. And this is just to illustrate the existing dashboard and where we are in the Valley Water Collaborative up through July of 2024. And Perry's going to talk about a little bit about what's been happening. This is the latest information. And so your EAP will now use the same dashboard to provide monthly reports to the regional board and anyone else for that matter. These are public available through the website that's shown in the second bullet from the bottom. And one more time, this process of implementation will begin, we assume, no later than February 26th. Next slide.
Richard,
Yes.
One thing you mentioned about that, if you back up, when we all, from the permits standpoint early on in this program, were a bit concerned that the regional board did not iterate in the basin plan, how frequently we needed to provide them reports, updates. Regional board loves reports, as you all know. We were able to build this dashboard where our staff reports bottled water deliveries, wells tested, et cetera. And this has sufficed for the regular reports that we have to turn into the regional board. Notwithstanding preliminary management zone proposal and MZIP, this is pretty much our communication with the regional board. This has been developed over time, and you will see in your individual basin budgets some of the support that we split with all the other management zones in the Central Valley to pay for this dashboard mechanism for reporting what we're doing in our early action plan. So this has been a real time saver. It's become automated to where it's very little staff time to update this.
Very good. Thank you, Perry. All right. So the last section I'm going to go through today is let's talk a little bit about participation. I'm going to reiterate some points that I've already made just to, again, kind of bring it home of where we need your participation over the next few months. So next slide. So again, management zone is a collection of permittees who are working collaboratively and collectively to comply with the nitrate control program. You do have the option of deciding whether path B, management zone participation versus work individually under the path A alternative, which is in the regulation. The table here shows as of February 24th, February 2024, the regional board provided us lists. I know it's changed a little bit. They're always adding, sometimes they're subtracting, but these are roughly the numbers of the different types of permittees that received a notice to comply back in December of 2023. Working from the bottom, the growers, of course, the notice to comply goes to the Irrigated Lands Program. The East San Joaquin Water Coalition represents them. And so they work collectively as a group within the overall management zone. Then the poultry and dairy and bovine, they have representation. And so the dairies and bovine facilities are represented by the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program. And I say most. Occasionally there's a dairy or a bovine facility that may be under individual permit. So they would be treated like an individual permittee. But sometimes there's some gray here, but most are represented by the Dairy Monitoring Program. And then we work with that representative. Similarly with the poultry facilities, while they don't have an organization like the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program, there are representatives like David Belt. I don't know if he's on the call today, but Dave has been representing poultry facilities in the priority 1 areas. So we work with a representative, and it's probably David for the priority 2, to just interact to make sure that the poultry facilities that are under the general order that they operate under are represented in the PMZP. Well, that then leaves all the individual permitted dischargers. And so these are, we think about wastewater facilities, wineries, food processors, composting facilities, and the like. We often collectively call them the non-15 program or non-15 chapter. I get it up mixed up. Anyway, it's the non-15 program is the simplest way to say it. And these are the numbers that we currently expect our potential permittees to potentially join the management zone, these numbers here. So now what does that mean? So next slide.
Richard, before you go on, I missed an edit on this slide. So the growers, the second bullet, the growers in East San Joaquin are covered through the Madera and Merced basins. Delta Mendota has the San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition, and then the Eastern San Joaquin is covered by the San Joaquin County and Delta Water Quality Coalition. So there's three water irrigated lands programs that are covering for the irrigated ag folks.
And my apologies, Perry. I know all that, and for some reason I was typing too fast. Yes, there are multiple coalitions represented in this group. Thank you.
Yes.
We got away with only one in the priority ones. So
sorry, Orville.
All right, so we will make sure that gets straightened out. All right, so that means there's an error on this slide. Oh, it's got a for example. I'm safe. So
One
again,
demerit for everybody.
thank you, Orville. So again, when it comes to working with you, the permittees, we will work with the representatives for the third-party organizations, so the coalitions or the dairy monitoring program, the poultry industry, and that saves a lot of time when there are multiple entities enrolled under these various programs. Then so most of our work as a consultant team is to work with the individually permitted dischargers, because each one of them have to make their own decision. And we will work with you in the following ways. So first and foremost, if you plan to join the management zone, you will need to establish a management zone participation agreement with the Valley Water Collaborative. That's the first thing to do. Then when that happens, we receive information from Marine and others within the VWC staff that there is your facility is joining the management zone and it wishes to be included in the preliminary management zone proposal. And then we will take that and make sure you're in there. As I indicated earlier, that is your notice of intent, is once you've done all that, you have done your job under the selection process for path A or B. You have selected B, you're participating, you'll be in the management zone proposal, you're done, at least at this point, okay? For the submittal in December, we are required to include a summary of your facility's nitrate-related management requirements that are in your current permit. Now, we will have summaries for the general orders for the coalitions, for the dairy programs, that those are just collective summaries because they all operate, or most operate under general orders. So that's easily done. But each individual permittee has their own permit and may have differing requirements. And so we will need to summarize those. What we typically do, as we did in priority ones, we will generate that for you and then reach back out and say, if you'd like to review it, take a look at it, here it is. It's relatively short, it's usually a page or two. It's mostly a template table that we summarize the same kinds of information for one permittee to another. If you're curious what that looks like, we've provided a link here. You can go look at the original Turlock PMZP and look for the nitrate practices section by individual permittee, and you can see a summary. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out. But it's not a lot of work. At the PMZP stage, your most important decision is to decide to be in the management zone and take care of the participation agreement. We do most of the work from there going forward to December. If
Richard,
yes.
Yeah, one thing in the voluminous meeting packet, I sent to everyone the examples that you sent out, just cut and pasted out of this proposal to give them an idea of what it is that you take and compile for the non-15 folks. So it gives them an idea that it is a very brief summary.
Yes. And I see a question there about who's best to reach out to. Is that you, Maureen, or Perry?
Yeah, have them drop me an email. We'll set up a phone call.
Okay. And then one last comment here at the bottom here is, while the document is due by December 28th of 2024, we are requesting if you want to be in the December submittal to have your participation agreement taken care of no later than November 1st. So about 6 to 8 weeks earlier, and the reason is as follows. One is the document's due right in the middle of the holidays. So our intent as a team is to have it pretty much ready and approved by whoever needs to approve it within the BWC, whether it's advisory committees or the board for the BWC, have that done by no later than mid-December. That way everybody can relax for the holidays. Pulling back, then we have to have drafts finalized and approved. So that means having our documents basically done internally in the early part of November. So we are requesting, if you plan to join and there's no need to wait, just go ahead and get it taken care of so we can get it in there by November 1st. That's our request. And next slide. So a couple more points to make. Again, just to reiterate, if you're not sure, you do have till February 26th. So I don't want to suggest that you're losing that time. You can take till February 26th. But again, we're going to submit the proposal December 28th. So what happens if you do not decide before we need to submit our proposal on December 28th? Here's again, just want to reiterate the steps of what will need to happen. You will still need to back up. Remember, the preliminary management proposal is your NOI. It's your notice of intent. If you're in there, you've done what you need to do to notify the board. If you're not in there, then you will still need to submit an NOI to the regional board. The instructions for that are in the notice to comply. You provide them if you plan to join the management zone, even if it's after December 28th, you will still tell the board you're going to do that. And then you didn't work with the Valley Water Collaborative to establish your management zone participation agreement. What will happen is that information gets communicated to the board that you have addressed all your requirements of the Valley Water Collaborative. The board then checks you off and says, okay, we know what they're doing. And then when the final management zone proposal eventually submitted later in 2025, you will be included in there just like you would have been in the preliminary management zone proposal. So there is this gap in this gray area, but I just want to really push. If you 99% sure you're going to join, let's go ahead, and the sooner you get your paperwork in, the better. Anything else you want to comment on that, Perry?
Yeah, I guess I would say I know there is a lot of uncertainty with city councils and city managers about this. You know, what's this going to be like in 2 or 3 years? Well, so far, we have not had anyone drop out of Valley Water, and not to say that that can't happen, but just keep in mind that if you are able internally with your facility and your discharges to meet the pathway A requirements, you can pull out of the management zone from Valley Water and pursue it on your own. This is not a forever commitment. And eventually, we're hoping over a period of time, we're all out of it and we're all doing good and we don't need this program any longer. Some entities and industry sectors are going to take longer than others. But for now, I think if you can get in and get that covered, then know in the future that if you're able to meet that pathway requirements, that you can pull out.
That is correct. And the last thing I guess I didn't mention is a little starred bullet here at the bottom. As we indicated, we're trying to set a guarantee date to be in the PMZP December submittal, and that is that November 1 date. Now, if you're working vigorously and it's November 2, you get us the paperwork. I'm not going to say we're not going to work to get you in there, but if it's December 1st and we're running out of time and we're trying to finalize a document to get it approved, we cannot guarantee you will be in it. But then just go through these steps up above, work with the regional board, let them know, yes, we will be joining, and file your paperwork. That's the key step. So, all right, I think, Perry, were you going to take the rest of this?
Yeah, go ahead and proceed.
Okay, so next slide. All right, so some key dates coming up. We've already mentioned the community outreach tomorrow afternoon and Thursday evening, the 15th. And if you're interested, just because you're curious, there's nothing wrong. Anybody can attend. Just let Maureen know and she'll send you the appropriate information. Here's some other things we're targeting. So September 16th, so about a month, we are planning to have a preliminary draft early action plan ready for permittee review. So one of the things is once you're participating as a permittee, we want to give you opportunity, particularly if you've already joined a management zone, to see what it is we're doing. We don't want to do this in a vacuum. So we will provide an opportunity. It'll be a relatively short opportunity, but say take a look at a document so you see what it is we're drafting. Then, timing shortly after that, we will be having a second community outreach meeting. Again, this is targeting local residents about the early action plan. That'll be about the week of September 23rd. We won't show them the early action plan. We'll tell them what's in it, what we're thinking about. That's what you're reviewing. But that'll be an opportunity for us to start getting any feedback. If we're getting any resistance. Again, highly unlikely, but you never know. We have to provide that opportunity. Then shortly thereafter, we will provide a draft early action plan for public review. So the public does have an opportunity to look at it. And then around October 14th, we're now working on the bigger document. Remember, the early action plan is just a piece of it. There is now what we're calling the administrative draft PMZP. This is the draft proposal for you, again, as a permittee participating, have an opportunity to look at the global document as it's coming together, emphasizing administrative draft. There may be pieces that are not in there. And of course, we're well before the date, which we're asking people to tell us for sure you're going to be in the management zone. So there's going to be some holes there where it says unknown at that point. Then the latter part of October, we will also provide an opportunity for the public to review a draft PMZP, which is part of our public process. And we'll also, about the same time, have our community outreach event number 3 to get any last feedback on early action plan. Let them know there's a preliminary management zone proposal out there for review if they're interested in looking at the bigger picture. This November 1 date we've beat on today about joining. December 28 is a submittal, but as we said, as a team, we're targeting mid-December to be done. We won't submit it before the 28th, and the reason being that the regulation says the early action plan initiation begins within 60 days of submittal of the PMZP. We don't want to submit the PMZP early, which means we have to start the early action plan early. So we will not submit till the 28th, but we want it to be ready, signed off, and ready to go. So all we have to do is hit send on the 28th. And then one more time, February 26th is a final day for any permittee that received a notice to comply to make sure the regional board knows which direction you're going. And last slide, I think. Yes. So we've had some questions along the way. We're happy to answer any questions now that we can. We have some contact information on the screen here. I do encourage you, if you're still trying to get your arms around what it is we're preparing, what it looks like. We have a 4th bullet down from the top. If you click into there, you can look at the current management zone documents that were prepared for the priority 1 areas, including the implementation plan. You can kind of see where this is headed in terms of an implementation plan. And down at the bottom is our team. Feel free to reach out anytime. We try to be as responsive as we can, as quick as we can, answer your questions. And yes, Orville, I see your hand.
Excellent. Trying to get this thing to work here. Okay, this is a question for Barb, a couple of them. Barb, first, what database did you use to pull the well data from for those maps you provided?
Sure. So the water quality, the nitrate groundwater concentration data was from Gamma, as well as specific inquiries or data requests to each county, because there are certain public water systems that are too small to be in the statewide compilation of groundwater quality data. So those are regulated by counties. So I had to contact the individual counties in each subbasin. So it's all publicly available data from the Gamma database, which is online, and then supplemented with any county specific data that they provided for the smaller water public water systems. And then
the second question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, please forgive me for cutting you off.
No, I thought, and then if you're wondering where the location of the domestic wells came from, that's a database from the Department of Water Resources. So again, another state database.
Yeah, second question, this is for contemplation with you and your team. I'd be interested in getting the GIS shapefiles for the Delta Mendota subbasin. I'd like to do some mapping and some just some analysis on my own for other purposes related to this. But if you guys would be willing to share them, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Richard, great job. Thank you for being there, bud.
No problem. And Barbara, do you know how to get a hold of Orville so you can communicate online? Okay.
Yeah, and Orville, I did want to mention, and Perry, you can also chime in, but for the priority 1 subbasins for Modesto and Turlock, we did have an interactive web map where you can actually zoom in to, you could type in an address and zoom into that location on a map online, and you can see what the estimated nitrate concentrations are, as well as what the name of the public water system that's nearby or in that area is called. So there's other resources that we're developing for the priority 2 subbasins too, that if you didn't have GIS tools, you can also still do some of this sort of stuff to look at it closer.
Thank you. And just very real quick to the larger group, look at, you've got a great team here. Richard and Barb and the others, I don't have time to mention all their names. I trust these people. I work with them in other projects. I'm excited about this. We've got the economy of scale going on, and also they've done this with P1s. And so I'm expecting a seamless kind of operation. I know there'll be bumps on the road, but I'm excited about the progress of this and the people we have in charge. Thank you.
Thank you, Orville. We will not disappoint.
Thanks, Orville. Yeah, one other thing, Barb, that interactive map should be ready about December. Is that what you're anticipating? Yeah, and those who want to see what it looks like, it is on the valleywaterc.org website, where you can punch in an address and it'll show you where you are, as Barb mentioned, in the area where high nitrates are. One other thing to add before JP jumps on here is last Tuesday, the management zones, priority 1 management zones, were in front of the State Water Board and gave an update on our 3 years of activity. You can go to the State Water Board website and fish your way through a matrix of links to get to the meeting recording, or you can wait about a week. I'm going to have that posted on the Valley Water website. The nitrate control program only. There was also a segment on the CV salts, on the salt basin plan amendment. That is, those of you interested in that part of the CV salt, you can watch that on the recording of that board meeting. JP, what?
Thanks, Barry. My question has to do with what the sessions tomorrow and Thursday are going to actually cover. I know they're intended for a somewhat different audience. I would guess a broader audience, community ideas to get input from the community or to tell the community what we're up to. Is it entirely repetitive of what we heard today, or will there be different information? I recall past stakeholder meetings where we also discussed not just like how we were doing the maps and how we were getting the nitrate data, but also, why nitrate isn't safe and what the potential solutions would be. Like, we want to test your well, we want to provide drinking water, there might be fill stations, we want to get your input on that. If it's so what is the plan? And then I have, I guess, a follow-up comment on depending on what the answer is.
So the presentation tomorrow and Thursday is more the latter part you were talking about, but at a very high level. So we will spend the first part talking about, first of all, what is the program? So there's some repetition so that people are aware when we say nitrate control program, what do we mean? So why are we doing this? We then go through how do you know where you get your water from? Why is nitrate a concern? Very fundamental statements. Again, the assumption is we're talking to folks that we're introducing a brand new subject to them. So it's very, very low level information. Then there will be a repetitious part, what Barb just presented on the preliminary assessment of water quality and wells is to help. It will be presented again tomorrow, so people can start maybe geographically better understanding what we're talking about here. So that part is very repetitious. But then the last part of the presentation is just to briefly introduce what is an early action plan. So talk a little further about when we say something's unsafe, what do we mean? And what would that mean in an early action plan with regards to well testing and things like that? Barely are we going to introduce solutions, because at this point, I mean, we'll talk about, we have a slide that says 3 key things we can do is home bottled water delivery, point of use type treatment as a potential down the road, and fill stations, but nothing about we're recommending this or that. It's just, these are things that are being considered. So it's very high level.
Yeah, one other thing to add to the list that this invite was sent to was an aggregation of some research done by the consultants on county health departments, environmental justice community organizations working in this area, farm groups, really, the stakeholders, the non-permit holders that could be impacted by this program.
Okay. No, I guess the point I sort of got the feeling, and maybe it wasn't intentional. I certainly felt like we were welcome to come to these meetings. You said that a couple of times. One of the reasons why I might encourage someone to go, not just feel welcome, is especially if you haven't been through a priority one management zone process, is I think it's good for the people who are ultimately paying for the program to understand what the solution set really is that's being proposed and why, and to know things like if we do fill stations, that doesn't mean we don't have to test people's wells and they're, those kind, and or provide home delivery water. Those kinds of things are kind of key. We got a lot of really good questions from people the first time around about, well, why do we have to do that? And shouldn't we do this? And that kind of thing. So I think there may be a different kind of curiosity from that portion of the stakeholders, the folks who are paying for it, than you would get from the folks who represent or are people that might actually receive the solutions in terms of drinking water. So just a thought to kind of mix in there, and not everyone's going to be interested, but I think some people might, and it might really help you tell the story back to your constituents of what it is we're actually paying for and when and how the thing works.
Yeah, good point, JP. As you all could tell, this call was about trying to have an understanding of what comes out of your department to fulfill the requirements of this first report and then leading into the second. And then, as JP said, that the other meetings are the outward facing part of this program that's for residences and community groups and state agents or local agencies. So Josie, you had a question?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Josie Tellers from City of Davis, part of the management zone. Hopefully by tomorrow we'll have a finality on it at the Yolo Sub Basin. First of all, Harry, thank you for inviting us to join today's webinar. It's really been very informative, and I hope that those folks in Yolo that are still not sure whether to join a management zone or going to pathway A will have more information today to have a better decision in their decision making. My question is that, okay, other than individual versus management zone, what is the main difference between pathway A and pathway B as far as okay, there's the difference in the deadline, but the deliverables are the same, correct?
Yes, ultimately, you'd be the same. So, for example, if you're an individual, what you'll need to provide the regional board is an analysis of your facility, its quality, and its area of contribution. Where's it impacting water quality and groundwater? Part of that is an assessment of potential domestic wells that might be affected by a facility's discharge over time. So so-called area of contribution. So you're going to have to provide the board an analysis to show impacts from your facility. If you are impacting domestic wells, you would have to have your own early action plan. In other words, and it may only be a few wells, it could be dozens of wells, depending on the area of contribution for your facility. So even though you might go path A, you might still be implementing early action plan. Then a fundamental difference would be you might implement a similar plan, but now you're paying for it solely by your facility versus under the management zone, you're doing it collectively. Everybody is pooling their resources to implement one plan versus an individual plan. One other thing I should note is that the analysis for showing impacts to groundwater under a Path A are probably a little more stringent. There's a definition of what's called shallow groundwater. I don't have it in front of me. I think it's in the notice to comply, where you have to be able to show what it is, what your effluent is, how's it impacting groundwater. So frankly, a pretty decent set of data to show the board what potential degradation may or may not be occurring. There have been some successful Path A submittals in priority 1 areas. These tended to be facilities that have greatly upgraded treatment. So wastewater facilities that have really improved their water, their treatment of their effluent. And so they could show that demonstration, but it wasn't very many of them. So.
Yeah, I would add to that, Richard, that I had many conversations 3 years ago with the smaller permit holders. And the point I made and would make again to this group is it's a business decision. What Richard just described, if you can't do that in-house, you hire your consultant to come in and prepare a report and you take it to the regional board, keeping in mind it may or may not be adequate to fulfill what their requirements are. And we had several folks or entities that took Pathway A, they submitted it, and the regional board said, no, you need you need to install a network of monitoring wells around your facility. The ones you have now are inadequate. So that was one example, but it's really a business decision on whether or not the cost to do that report and the chance that it may not get adopted versus the business decision of the cost of participating in this Pathway B with Valley Water. So simply said, you just have to look at those costs and really and I suggested this to many, get your consultant in and have them give an estimate of what's needed for that Pathway A submittal.
Right.
And they could give you a pretty good idea.
And the other thing to do is I think it's been encouraged. There was a webinar a while back and others, just call a regional board. I mean, if they're on the fence and not sure,
Right.
it's worth a meeting with regional board staff and just walk through what their expectations are.
Yes. And the key contact on that is Angela with her new last name. I'm sorry, it's Levon Cleaver. Angela Cleaver. She's great. She's a very helpful regional board staffer.
Yeah.
And she's good at answering questions.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that. And last but not the least, as you know, the YOLO group is meeting tomorrow, which is in conflict with your outreach meeting to the public tomorrow afternoon. So I'm hoping to receive the information from you about the Thursday night meeting that we can participate in via webinar as well to see how that kind of outreach work where you're at. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie.
I don't see any other hands raised. Anybody else have a comment or a question?
Hi, Andrew Quaddy here, Quaddy Winery in Madera. Can you hear me, Perry?
Yes, go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so in our situation at the Quaddy Winery a few years ago, we submitted a plan to the water board to allow us to increase our production of wine. And this involved us going up to 200,000 or 300,000 cases, and we calculated the amount of water we would discharge. I hired some consultants at people at UC Davis, actually, or they related to operating out of there, and we came up with a solution to a plan to discharge wastewater with less than about, I believe it was 2 milligrams per liter of nitrate. I could still join the collaborative with everybody else and just submit what our plan is for our little business, or wait for the board. We submitted a notice of intent recently And we gave them a deadline and when we would have our project completed, see. So that's where we are. So I think we've probably done a helpful thing, obviously, as far as controlling the wastewater, nitrogen. And any case, I'm just waiting for some comments from the Valley Water Collaborative on how we might work with you guys, or maybe to do the Path A.
Yeah, I think it would be worth talking to the regional board staff who you submitted that to, or Angela, and ask them flat out, is what this new system we set up going to be adequate to qualify us for pathway A? Are we not causing or contributing, as Richard said earlier, to nitrate contamination of groundwater? That's the bar that they set. And I don't know, Richard, if you want to add to that.
I would say that definitely reach out. I wouldn't wait for them to respond, Andrew, because they have enough on their plate. You could be stuck in a black hole. I would push. But very interesting, you said you have a project already defined. And one of the things in a Path A submittal is, let's just say, based on what you are operating now, if you were to submit everything and show, yes, we are currently impacting groundwater, here's what we think, but you submit that proposal that here's what we're going to do to improve our water quality, that would meet the definition of an alternative compliance project. And I think the board might agree under Path A, great, implement it, give us a schedule, et cetera, and it would comply. So even though you're impacting now, you actually have a project on the books ready to implement to do. That's how I would think they'd look at it, but I'm not the board. So I don't want to put you in limbo here. I really think you should push on them to react to what you should do. And as you already said, I think there's always a fallback, at least temporarily. Stay in compliance for sure by joining the management zone now. You can always come out later.
Thank you. Okay, great.
I did notice that we had a question about when do you expect the deadline for contributions to be made as far as joining the management zone?
Yeah, we're in the process of scheduling all the sub-basin meetings. We have one that's going out for early September for the Eastern San Joaquin Basin. The other's going to be clustered around the middle of September. And we should have a pretty good idea by that time what these industry sector totals will be. We proposed or submitted budgets to all the basins on what the total budget for 24 would be, but what now needs to be determined is within the basin and the industry sectors, what sector is going to cover which part of the budget. So that once those sectors have agreed upon these percentage splits, then we'll know exactly what the individual charges will be. Contributions, sorry, we don't charge. There's a nonprofit, so we have some language. It's a little different from business, but the contributions to support Valley Water will be for the individual entities. So we're very close to that, I guess, is the bottom line. We should know for sure by that series of meetings, or once those meetings are completed in September. And then the actual contribution itself would be as soon as possible. Of course, we've got commitments from irrigated ag and dairy to keep our checkbook in the black, if you will. Our cash flow is such that the work that's being done now, we're going to get billed in September and October and November. So we need a cash flow in place to cover that, cover those invoices for the work that's being done, preparing these plans. And there's exceptions, of course. If an entity needs to go through many processes with city councils and otherwise, there's a little bit of leeway given. And the fact that the irrigated ag and dairy is helping cover the baseline work is helpful to spread those costs or the need for that funding over a period of time. Think. So the budget for each of the basin overall is it's a little different from for each one, but it's between 205,000 and 225,000 for all the entities that are in the basin to split amongst themselves. So each basin participants are responsible for covering the cost of that basin expenses.
To clarify, that number was for 2024 that Perry just mentioned.
Yes. And we're just beginning to work on 2025 because it's just around the corner. We'll start needing to work on other activities. Follow up to the PMZP and the well testing and bottled water, which, as I explained earlier, we'll have a good idea what those costs could be based on the data that Barb shared with you on the number of wells in each of the basins. Anything else? Anything else to add, Richard, Barb, others, Vicky?
Appreciate the good questions.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for participating. Don't hesitate to reach out, send us an email if you want one-on-one conversations related to these subjects, and sure we'll be seeing you all in the not too distant future. So thanks a lot.